Yes, good, you can hear me. Welcome to this combined session. It will be the prize ceremony for the Stockholm Industry Water Award and the Founders Business Seminar. You're all most welcome, both you who are in this room and the ones joining us via the live stream. My name is Jens Berggren. I'm the director of the Stockholm Water Prize and the Stockholm Industry Water Award at the Stockholm International Water Institute. Whew, I got that right. It feels like I've cleared the biggest hurdle of this session now, so now I can relax. It's great to have you all here. During this event, we'll celebrate both the great achievements of this year's winners of the Stockholm Industry Water Award, Netafim, and discuss the fascinating and wonderfully complex issues of valuing and pricing of water. And to me, these two closely interlinked issues, both managing the booming demand for water and increasing water productivity and water efficiency, especially in agriculture, are at the core of creating a more water-wise world. So I think this topic, the two topics that we will be celebrating and discussing today are key issues for the future. As you hear, we have a jam-packed session ahead of us. The speakers later on will only have 5 minutes each, so I feel it will be a bit unfair for me to take up more of time for the session. Yeah. There was sort of an acclamation of agreement from the front row here. So hence, I would like to hand over to two persons from the members of the Stockholm Industry Water Award Committee. The chair, Sten Bergström, and the member, my floor. Please, the stage is yours. Both the topic. If you want.
It's very nice to be here indeed, and I will just very briefly say a few words about this award, and then later on you will hear more about the winner. This award was established already in the year 2000 by CIVI, the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, and the Royal Swedish Academy of Engineering Science, which I represent here. It honors the business sector contributions to sustainable water management, and I think that everyone in this room, they realize the importance of this. I have to remind you that a few weeks from now we will have the launch of the IPCC fifth assessment report in this very city of Stockholm, and water is of course on the top line there. The purpose is to recognize companies and business organizations that demonstrate devoted water stewardship through impressive achievements in their water usage. The achievements include improved performance in production processes, new products and management, as well as innovative approaches in water and wastewater technologies. That was a long sentence, but it's also a big prize. The award is given to any sector of business and industry and bestows the winner with global recognition for their accomplishment and symbolizes a strong commitment to advance the world's water situation. And today, the award is presented for the 14th time. So may I hand it over to you now, and you come to the winner. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. The demand for accessible fresh water across our planet is exploding. By 2050, it is expected to increase by a conservative 55%. Water for food is the dominant ingredient of this demand. Irrigated agriculture has been perennially thirsty. It accounts for 70% of the global freshwater take, and in developing countries, it withdraws as much as 90%. The efficient use of this water is vital, not just for securing our future food, but crucially also for securing our water future. Typically, efficiency gains in irrigated agriculture have been less than 1% per year from 1990 to 2010. We need a new paradigm where efficiency is king and food's water footprint shrinks dramatically. It is in this environment that Netafim has emerged as a game changer. It has pioneered the drip irrigation technology that radically improves water, energy, and labor productivity. Today, more than 10 million hectares of farmland are drip irrigated, and the pace is accelerating. Drip irrigation typically halves water use compared to almost every other irrigation method and simultaneously increases crop yields. Netafim's remarkable achievements no doubt constitute one of the most significant innovations in irrigated agriculture. In an era where climate change is making the entire process of food production greatly uncertain and risk-prone, Netafim has helped establish a new dynamic that is helping farmers across the world to grow more with less. When Netafim was founded in 1965 and developed its first prototypes of drip irrigation and associated water use efficiency technologies, it could have barely recognized the seeds of the revolution that it was sowing. But looked at from the perspective of today's water-stressed world, Netafim's revolution was indeed a remarkable design for tomorrow. It is the significance of this design that has persuaded the award committee that Netafim is a most worthy winner of the 2014 Stockholm Industry Award. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mayan Steen. And now I would like to ask the chair of the board of the Stockholm International Water Institute and Mr. Igor Eisenman, the CEO of Netafim, to join the stage for the ceremony. Music maestro. Thank you, Peter.
Thank you.
And congratulations, Netafim and Mr. Igor Eisenman. Mr. Eisenberg, as a bridge, maybe over troubled waters, but also towards a brighter future, could you please tell us about Netafim's achievements and also bridging to this afternoon's discussion on the need to start valuing water better? The stage is yours.
Thank you, Jens. Thank you, Mr. Forsman. Distinguished members of the Stockholm Water Foundation and Stockholm International Water Institute, ladies and gentlemen, first and foremost, to reassure you, I was given 15 minutes, and I'm going to take a little bit less than that. In other words, yes, I have a number of pages, but the fonts are quite large. I am truly honored and humbled to accept the 2013 Stockholm Industry Water Award on behalf of Netafim's 4,000 employees and thousands of our colleagues and partners in over 110 countries across the globe. I also stand here today on behalf of the visionary founders, a small group of farmers and engineers living in the Negev desert of Israel that 48 years ago started a new industry. Drip irrigation was by no means, at that time, a product in demand, and its introduction faced the challenges every innovation must overcome, starting with the design of an entire system to run low pressure and low flow emitters, supporting the emergence of non-existent supply of specific ancillary products, and developing all new crop scheduling practices. That was nothing less than reinventing farming. Today, we're proud to lead an industry that can make a major contribution to two of the crucial challenges of our time: water scarcity and food security. Drip is an ever-present solution suitable for growers of all sizes, from smallholders to large-scale growers, and is today the mainstream irrigation system in many cash crops, particularly fruits and vegetables. Drip is the system of choice also in all types of greenhouses or protected agriculture, and covers overall more than 10 million hectares. you see my floor, we are using the same sources. So we probably got the right or wrong same information. More than 10 million hectares that are more than, and I would add, but only 5% of the total irrigated area of the planet. The technology addresses water-related issues such as water scarcity and aquifer depletion, food-related issues such as arable land reduction and soil erosion, and as such, DRIP will be a key contributor for helping the world deal with the growing population and the subsequent increase in demand for food and water over the next few decades. But we at Netafim are not happy to be just the best option for specialty crops. And in the last few years, we pushed strongly to see rapid penetration of DRIP into commodity crops like corn, soybeans, and potatoes, and promising inroads are underway on rice. Increasing the penetration into basic food crops is therefore the mission we took upon ourselves, and the mission that should serve the basis of our discussion today, the paradox of water value and water price. Simply, we should look for ways to value and price water that do more than rationalize the existing pool. It is clear that achieving better results from water allocations and returns must look into ways to make the total pool bigger. This is what DRIP is about. To introduce the subject of our panel today, I want to share with you some thoughts on the subject of water value and price from our industry perspective. Let's start with one widely accepted fact. The total water consumption, we are told, is shared by the domestic sector 10%, the industrial sector 20%, and the agricultural sector the remaining 70%. The figures are accepted but clearly do not represent the diversity found in many regions, where the agricultural sector consumption varies from 25 to 90%. This data suggests a simple conclusion. Addressing water challenges cannot and must not overlook the use of water and irrigation. And however trivial this sounds to most of us, irrigation is too often absent from the public discussion on water issues. This makes no sense in our view. Another widely accepted premise is water is a global concern, but potential solutions are local or regional at best. Let's have a closer look at the implications of it. You have your presentation already now. Oh, that's okay. It's not a presentation. You will just look at some of the pictures as I speak.
Lovely. Thank you.
Thank you. So let's have a closer look at the implications of the local or regional nature of the water problem. The economics of water challenge conventional wisdom. True, all scarce resources have economic value, and in the absence of regulation, their pricing is determined by demand and supply. And being rain and snowpack, the natural sources of fresh water, water could be considered a commodity, and as such, it could be priced uniformly based on the cost of catching and delivering. But the economic value of water differs substantially based on use, time, and location. Is the economic value of water in the Central Valley of California, the Colombian rainforest, and the desert steppes of Inner Mongolia identical or even similar? Will pricing policies in one region have an impact or any impact on others? We know the answer is no. Water is unique in many senses, and unlike land, which is a true finite resource, water is a natural, renewable resource, and more of it can be made available by investing in catchment, storage, leak prevention, soil drainage, and obviously irrigation techniques. And then we still have oceans. Pricing water, then, is a tool that can primarily help optimizing water allocation, but without regulation, the economic value of water can distort the basic needs of society. Think of golf courses, gas fracking, or cash crops that are willing to pay high prices for disproportionate amounts of water. These eventualities are part of today's reality in water-rich as well as in water-stressed countries. The design of fair water allocation and pricing scheme for the agricultural sector is very difficult, and it should meet several criteria. In all cases, a fair scheme should be acceptable to both the agricultural sector and society, minimize negative impacts on farm income, and give incentives to save water and recover a larger share of cost, including external cost. In many emerging or undeveloped countries, allocation follows the subsistence needs for minimum domestic consumption and food production, and pricing policies that support different goals vary accordingly and take into account local and regional circumstances regarding water use and water rights, water availability, farm sizes and crops grown, possible alternative crops and marketing channels, alternative technologies to save water, or change irrigation techniques and existing subsidies. Realistic cost recovery seems to be a sensible way to establish a basic allocation balance in developed countries. But countries that put food security or must support big rural populations as their top priority will continue to subsidize the cost of water directly and indirectly. In both cases, efficient irrigation can make the pool bigger and the frame of choices broader. Lastly, let me touch on the value of clean water as a human right. Access to clean water is a moral value that has little to do with economic value. And due to the local nature of the subject, in the most affected areas, pricing may not be a part of the equation. People must have access to clean water, but as we speak, many die because of poor sanitation and diseases generated by contaminated water. Here, increasing the available pool of water is not enough. And I am taking the liberty to quote from the SAI, the Sustainable Agriculture Initiative, a group of leading food and drink corporations, in their report on drip irrigation and water scarcity. I'm quoting, "Reduced negative impact on local fresh water quality is one of the several reasons why a farmer should be recommended to implement a modern irrigation technology as drip irrigation. Reducing the water effluent from farm fields will positively affect the surface and groundwater quality properties due to minimized introduction in downstream water systems of leaking pollutants derived from over-fertilization and pesticide application, typical of conventional irrigation systems." Ladies and gentlemen, the road ahead is long. This prestigious award Netafim is offered today gives us greater legitimacy as we continue to partner with other public and private organizations to help reduce water usage and make the world a more sustainable place. Our tagline is, "Grow more with less," and that's exactly what we are all about. This award is the best recognition not only to what we achieved, but more importantly, to the general awareness of what should and can be achieved. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Igal. Actually, what you said there is very interesting. We, speaking about CV, gave you the prize for reducing or increasing water efficiency, but as you said, also reducing the amount of water that you use in agriculture can also improve the quality of water downstream. So you have even bigger reason to getting the prize. I'm happy for that. Now, to our first speaker this afternoon, or our first of the 5-minute speakers, I have a very, very simple question. Unfortunately, I know that simple questions often require very complicated answers. And Professor Alexander Sasha Sender, you don't have that much time. But the question is, what is the right price of water? The floor is yours.
Thanks a lot, Jens, for this nice introduction and this very simple question. And as you see at the first slide, I actually didn't even put that title up, because I think this will be the topic of the round table. I would like to show you a few issues which are important when we talk about whatever you will see. I hate to say a price of water, And as I go through the few slides I have, you will be able to see what I mean. For me, water issues are first of all emotional, and they are highly complex. Whenever you think of a simple solution, it won't work. First of all, you say, I'm going to price the water, everybody's up the wall. Nobody's going to listen to you. This is not the way to go forward. We have to figure out how we have to slice, actually, this, the question about the water into pieces which we can handle, where we can handle the emotional part, or at least deal with it, and reduce somehow the complexity. So there are values and value. And the values are very often not thought about. And the values are spiritual. There is no religion around the world where water is not one of the key parts of it, a pillar. And you can go around the world where you want to. It touches the soul of humans very deeply. Water has something to do with the existence, with the future, with the present. It's ethical. And we have heard it from Igal also, the ethical aspects of it. It has, without water, you have no life. So how can you turn the tap of somebody? The person will die or the public will die. Social. It has to be affordable. It has to be equal. Aesthetical. Who doesn't like to live on a lake, on a river? That's the preferred places. There where your houses are actually gaining most of the price. You like to be there. But then we have the value and not the values. These are the costs. And very often when we talk about price, we mean costs. This is important. The tariffs. Those who deliver water to somebody have to ask a tariff. It's not the price. It reflects what you have to charge to supply and protect the water. Then you have a price, and the price is made by a market. There is no water market out there. Or if there is one, a very small one, maybe a little bit in Australia. But there is not really a market around there. So the price is almost the wrong word to use. I won't sit too much on it, but it's very important to think about it. And then water has a tremendously strategic role. It goes from local to geopolitics. It goes from local, the water you have. It goes from countries into basins, when you have built dams and control the water flow. Or if you go a step further and you use what Igal just talked about, food production. There is where the local issue of water becomes global, because you send around food around the world, it becomes geopolitical. The issue of water is complex. And if we talk about the price or the costs or the tariffs, we have to keep that in mind. Now, there are dilemmas between the values. And you see on this slide emotional value, or what you pay for water, or pay for the service. These are the three lines which you see there. And then I have put them water for drinking and hygiene, water for ecosystem, water for food production, water for transport, water for industry. If you look at the emotional value, the highest is water for drinking and hygiene, and it goes down, not much for the energy. Sorry, Joppe. But this is kind of the emotional issue. However, when it comes to paying, we are willing to pay for the drinking water. We are also willing to say that the industry has to pay a lot for the water. But in the developed world, where the issue is actually ecosystem, nobody is going to pay anything for it, even if you talk about ecosystem services. And if you look at the services, it's even more drastic, that actually you are willing to pay for your drinking water, you are not willing to pay for the ecosystems, and you say that everybody in the industry and for the transport water has to be paid. This is what people feel and see, and this is not a straight line. And to all of this complication comes when we come into governments. Responsibilities of water are in different ministries. Ministry for Agriculture, Energy, Environment, Health, Infrastructure, Transport, and with very little coordination between of it. And if you look at the international organization, it's even worse. I couldn't bring all the words on one slide, if you see that. Coordination, almost inexistent. So what can we have as a solution? A possibility where the energy sector actually made a few steps ahead in the past was to take the wedges approach. You slice pieces out which you can handle, like municipal water management. Drinking water, wastewater, it's clear. I think there we come very far. Water and energy, yes, too. Agriculture, we have everything heard about it. I don't have to add anything. Infrastructure is not the pipes under the ground. Infrastructure is damming, flooding control, and so that's the big things. They are not directly linked immediately when it comes down for the payment of it, but the discussion, it always interferes. Environment and ecosystem, we have no idea. We have a few examples. We can go into them during the discussion, but the environment and ecosystems we cannot handle at the time. And there are certainly more. Where is the integration? I disintegrated the whole thing, but at the end of the day, somebody has to overlook it. And at the moment, the responsibilities are in ministries. Ministries without any coordination whatsoever, or a little bit of coordination, but everybody wants to have the control of it. I am always asked by the politician, what do we have to do? I said, give the water away, put it into an agency. Why the heck do you want to deal with water? You can only make it wrong. Whatever you do will be wrong. And if the agency does something wrong, you can fire the CEO. So why the heck are you not doing it? And we have good examples, like the EPA, for example, in the US. It did a good job. And politicians are not fired by the fault of the EPA, but the EPA responsibles are. And I think we have got a long way there. An interesting part to discuss about that. So the final thought is, we have heard it all over, it's one of the big challenges of the 21st century. Water issues are emotional, and I would like really put that down. This is the point. Whenever you want to have a solution, you have to take into account it is highly emotional and it is highly complex. And they trigger immediately skepticism against any new solution. You come for water, people say, yes, but. And then comes a whole list of but down the road. Trust in solving water issues, because they are emotional, is the most important one. Don't try to be intransparent with water issues. The slightest intransparency will kill your project, whenever, in the beginning or somewhere down the road. And you have to really be clear that you can only keep transparency and decoupling policy making and implementation, because that comes in each way. It's totally different rates in which things are happening. It's different. And if you couple it, it will not work. And the rest of it, demographics, and we have heard of it. It's important because water will become one of the biggest issue in the 21st century. It has to be solved inclusive, fair, and it has to be dealt with professionally. These are my points to consider. Thank you.
Thank you, Sasha. It's very interesting to hear such a strong call for increased cooperation on water, or working together, especially this year when we have the theme of water cooperation for the World Water Week. Thank you for that. Also, got a nice comment from Mai here when you said that everybody wants to live near to water. She said, not in the Philippines. So I think also there are parts of New York and other places where it could not be that attractive, maybe the beach front. Yeah. You might want to look at it, but from a distance. Thank you so much. South Africa is, to my knowledge, the only country in the world that has the right to water enshrined in its constitution, and at the same time a legislation that allows the trade of water rights. So my question to our next speaker, Mr. Desigan Naidoo, from the Water Resource, I have to look it up. It's always difficult. The Water Research Commission. I always want to say the Water Resource Commission, but the Water Research Commission of South Africa. Does the constitutional right to water come at a price? The floor is yours.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's very happy to be here, and it looks like it's going to churn into a very interesting debate. The short answer to the question is that everything comes at a price. The question is who pays that price, and who pays when the price is not met. And this is essentially the kind of discussion we're currently having in South Africa right now. But why is this important to look at? And I'll start with my slide shortly. But in a discussion yesterday, one of the pennies that dropped around the importance of revisiting the notion of the constitutional right is how to deal post-2015 with the other 50% who are more marginalized than the 50% whose needs may have been met by 2015 by the MDG goals. People who have far fewer rights and far fewer abilities to meet the market. So the South African story is an interesting one, and given the complexity of trying to do everything in 5 minutes, you're going to get a 5-minute quick overview of some of our drivers, and I'm sure I'm going to misrepresent this wholly, but we come out of a legacy of 300 years of colonialism, and if that wasn't bad enough, we then had 50 years of grand apartheid. We're an interesting bunch. The generation that comes after me won't have this baggage, so you'll hear a different presentation. But one of the core drivers around why South Africa took this view is that we had to deal very immediately with a legacy of apartheid and the drivers associated with that legacy. So what the Constitution sought to do and what the law sought to do and what the servicing paradigm sought to do is to organize for us to have rights where there were no rights before. So we come from a history of no equal rights. We had probably the largest social engineering experiment in the world with the discrimination project. We had inequity of services and inequity of access to services. We had the denial of access to participation in the economy and to the benefits of the economy. And we had denial to access of education as well. So in that realm, it was very easy to decide to go with the notion of a Bill of Rights as the centerpiece of a constitution. So the mechanism was exactly that. So Chapter 2 of the South African Constitution constitutes this Bill of Rights. Section 27 of that says that everyone has the right to have access to sufficient food and water. No one's taken us to court yet on this, but that's coming. And this was reinforced by the National Water Act and something called the National Water Resources Strategy. So, has any of this worked? Here's the very short answer. The very short answer is that in 1994, not a very long time before now, some 20 years, 59% of the South African population, the people who lived in South Africa, had what was considered reasonable access to water services. By May 2013, that access has grown to 95.2%. This is not a bad record. This is pretty good. This is a very sharp S-curve. It's a very steep slope. And it was driven on the basis of a constitutional right and the need to service that constitutional right, and therefore the funding mechanism and the capacity building and the infrastructure, et cetera, followed. However, there is always another side to the coin. And some of the other results associated from this constitutional right is something we've been experiencing quite intensely for the past 5 years in South Africa, the notion of the service delivery protest. So we have disgruntled communities of people who are part of the other 5% that are not caught in the 95% that still don't have the access to the right kinds of services. And this is not restricted to water, it's energy, it's housing development, and various other kinds of things. But water and water issues are on the top of the list. So one of the key mechanisms people are using currently are the mechanisms of going out into the street and organizing for themselves to express themselves around this right that has not been met. So, what we're looking at here is a balancing of the pros and cons to a rights approach. Because on the one side, we can clearly see that the rights give you an ability to protect the poor and the vulnerable in your society. One of the things you have to accept alongside that is some of the less vulnerable people and the less poor people will also have the benefit to the right, sometimes more than the poor people, but that's part of the cost. That it does represent a mechanism, a blueprint perhaps, for universal access and the notion of universal access. And you have a mechanism definitely, and South Africa has proved this, and countries around us in various spheres have proved this as well, that you have a mechanism to increase public investment, not necessarily private investment, in getting part of the job done. On the other side are the things that go along with this. The first is the notion of frustration with the non-delivery. So if you don't have the mechanism to get the 100% access, you have to do with the X that keeps you away from the 100% access. The second, and very important point around valuing water versus pricing of water, is that you can easily entrench the notion of entitlement, where the notion is that we don't have to do anything to have access to these services because the right should be guaranteed. And so entitlement becomes another issue. And I think the thing that we're going to talk a fair amount about in this debate today is that you could also promote wasteful behaviors. So when the right is guaranteed and the entitlement is there, the value notion is what takes a few steps backwards. Now, I was going to stop at this point, but I think if you wouldn't mind, I'm going to put a couple more slides up very quickly. And wanted to introduce this notion, which we can take forward in the debate later, because we are going to be talking about what the market forces do and what the non-market forces do. And this is a picture. If we look at basic human needs and then advanced human needs, because most of us live beyond the basic level, and look at low-level production, primarily subsistence-level activity, usually agriculture, but not necessarily only agriculture, and then high-level production where you are in the general market and you're working for profit, this use of sophistication says that there are different realms for different things. So one of the arguments is that the realm of the rights base really belongs to meeting the basic human needs, if we're talking about human beings, and the rights of the environment would be included there, and a very large chunk of the subsistence economic activity that is water enabled. And if we do that, and we say alongside that there is room for the market, then the market would dominate in the case of the luxury needs associated with what human beings do and the high-level production issues. And this becomes components of a multimodal system that I think we should discuss, because a lot of this is entrenched within the National Water Act, because the National Water Act organizes for us to use a human rights base around meeting the basic needs components of this while allowing for the modalities of the market to deal with the other sphere of the problem. Sure, I think that does my 5 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think that one of the problems that we have in I think it's practical and political challenges with viewing water as just another commodity is that we use it for so much. Actually, all of us use it for so much. So it's not a concept like take clothes or food or diamonds, to use the paradox of Adam Smith. We can't say that water is just another commodity. On the other hand, the reason or the issue that we actually do use it for so much, or all of us, is maybe also the reason why we could need a price to manage this demand. So this is another of the paradoxes of water, that since we use it for so much, it will be hard to find the right price. We all have all the different uses that you showed, but at the same time, that could also be a reason why we need to manage this demand a bit better. And from there on, I go to Anthony Cox from the OECD. Do we actually need a price to manage something well? The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Jens, and good afternoon, and congratulations to Netafim for their award today. Single word answer to you, Jens? Yes, you need a price. Water pricing is necessary, but not sufficient to ensure sustainability. And I'm going to do I want to make 4 points in my 5 minutes today that to help understand where we're coming from in this issue around pricing versus value. First of all, there's no doubt that water pricing changes behaviour. The work that we've done shows that those countries countries who price water to the households, those households use 20% less water on average than households that are not charged for water. Not only that, but it changes their behaviour by changing their investment decisions. These households who are charged either a flat rate for water or a variable rate, they also invest in water efficient equipment like low flush toilets, flow saving showers and things like that. So there is no doubt that water pricing is effective in changing behaviour. Now, it's necessary but not sufficient, and one of the challenges we found here is that pricing varies enormously across countries. And what I would make a distinction here is between pricing and value. Water pricing does not equal value. What we've got here, water pricing is determined by a market in a small number of places, as pointed out by Sasha, or more regularly by a regulatory authority. It is subject to a range of political whims. It is conditioned by social acceptance, social mores. It is basically, when we talk about pricing in this context, it's the cost of supply. And many countries are not able to achieve adherence to a sustainable cost recovery principle, which we tend to advocate. And so what we see here is that prices vary enormously across OECD countries, from the highest prices paid in, this is a survey of a few years ago, paid in Denmark, down to Mexico, water scarce area. Lowest prices in the OECD, at least there was a few years ago. So this demonstrates the fact that water pricing, in the way that's conventionally recognised, is enormously political, enormously difficult to implement, and really cannot be said at any stage to reflect the value of water in these different countries. But let's talk about value. One of the things I mentioned there is that one of the things about this pricing here is that it doesn't represent the scarcity of water. There's no scarcity pricing here. One of the things that came out in Australia recently, I don't know if many of you remember, Sydney built a desalination plant a few years ago. This is not the Sydney plant, this is another plant. I didn't get a good picture of the Sydney plant, so this is another random desal plant. There was a study, there have been studies to show that if scarcity pricing had been in place during the worst drought that Australia suffered in over 100 years, it would not have been necessary to build this desal plant. So you could have had, if you had proper scarcity pricing in place, you could have affected the bottom line of the New South Wales state government, the bottom line of the water consumers out for the next few decades. You could have avoided a costly investment in a desal plant that really hasn't had to be brought online yet. Sure, we've got a fail-safe mechanism there, but at what cost? The other thing about prices and the bigger issue of market mechanisms generally is that they give you a lot of flexibility. And this is some graphs up here about the impact of the drought, we call it the Millennium Drought in Australia, on the Murray-Darling Basin. And during that drought, the availability of water went down by something like 70% to farmers, the water available to farmers. But the value of agricultural productivity only declined by around 20%. This was primarily through the flexibilities that were able to be achieved in agricultural production, changing the timing and the nature of production through trading water rights. Implicit in that is there's a price on water for agriculture. At the same time, the government was able to purchase water rights to increase the environmental flows to the Murray-Darling Basin, and they can now hold those as a Commonwealth water holder and can release those at times in the future to increase the environmental flow. So what it does give you is this flexibility by revealing values. So this whole class of price mechanisms, of market mechanisms, although the ones in Australia are quite well advanced, gives you that flexibility to ensure the sustainability of water resources. And one of the things I'd like to leave with you in the case of the Australian Murray-Darling Basin example, which a lot of people jump on and say, well, we want to get there. Markets, water trading sounds fantastic. Took 20 to 30 years to get there. It's not an overnight success. And there's still a lot of things to be done. They made a lot of mistakes on the way. But they started with some basic building blocks around property rights, around introducing the notion of paying for a precious resource in a country that is really arid. Thank you, Jens.
Thank you very much, Anthony. Also, our next speaker comes from the world's driest inhabited continent. But he runs, I would say, one of the world's most progressive and innovative water utilities. So, Tony, how has valuing of water helped you make better decisions? The floor is yours.
Thank you, Jens. It's a delight to be here, and it's a delight to hear all these Australian case studies, and I'm going to give you another one. I'm a CEO of a major water utility in Australia, about $1 billion worth of Australian revenue per annum. We provide water and sanitation services to about 1.7 million people. I also chaired WaterAid Australia for 10 years, so I have some understanding of the challenges of providing water and sanitation in the developing world. And I note in this conference there's a lot of discussion about how water should be priced. And what I'm going to give you is a bit of a case study about what we've done. But if you look at our history over time, we've come from property-based pricing, which is basically a wealth tax. Now we're 100%. Now we're sort of user-pays pricing. And what we're trying to do at Yarra Valley Water now is move to a new regime, which includes some of the values that Sasha was talking about just previously. We've just come through an unprecedented drought, as was mentioned. It was called the Millennium Drought in Australia, and it's dramatically increased the community's perceptions about the value of water. We're not water experts. We're not academics. We're not environmental economists or pricing experts at Yarra Valley Water, but we are expert practitioners, and with the ability and the will to try new approaches. New approaches to meet two of our key strategic objectives. The first one is to provide our services within the carrying capacity of nature, and to do so at the lowest possible community cost. Now, we recognised in 2005, if we were to achieve those objectives, we need to get a much better understanding of the true value of water and consider externalities in the price of water. So let me tell you what we've done in that regard. Well, the first thing is that we've set aside in our watersheds for the water that exists, the surface water, which we use in Melbourne, we've divided into two components, an environmental component and a consumptive component. So the water for the environment is set aside first, and that protects the natural capital of waterways, and what remains is deemed to be for the consumptive component. An active water market exists for trading the consumptive component between competing users in some parts of our system, and the traded price varies with scarcity, as Anthony just mentioned. Every year, on top of that, my utility pays an environmental contribution. This year we'll be paying $37 million, which will go to the government, who will then use that to repair the damage of us extracting water from the environment. There's also a carbon tax in Australia, and our prices include the cost of that tax. So if you add all those things together, our prices are not too bad. But the price evolves much further when we start to look at new infrastructure options, where we're trying to add local externalities that help us choose between alternative servicing options. And I'm going to show you how we did that. Well, first of all, we started off with a natural step here from Sweden, and that helped us understand our role in the environment and the impacts we were having on the environment. We then made extensive use of life cycle assessment to identify the material externalities, particularly environmental externalities, of course. As soon as we did that, we realised that there was going to be winners and losers, and what might be good for our utility might have a detrimental effect on other stakeholders. So we identified all the direct costs affecting all of the stakeholders, including the externalities, and then we computed the financial impact that all those costs would have on each of the stakeholder groups. And after we did that, then we had a common language to engage with the stakeholders and come to some consensus around what might be the best solution to move forward. We've also used multi-criteria analysis to help us make these choices as well, to assist in the decision-making. And in one major project, we calculated a community value ratio by, for each option, dividing the weighted multi-criteria analysis score by the net present value of each option. So, what's been the result of all of this? Well, it's really changed the way that Yarra Valley Water operates and functions. Today, Yarra Valley Water is greenhouse gas neutral. We've also self-imposed a nutrient cap on all our discharges to our local waterways from our sewage treatment plants. Through the drought, the millennium drought that Anthony mentioned, we've cut our per capita consumption of our customers by 40%. And even though the drought is finished, our customers remain committed to water conservation. We're now doing recycled water as a matter of course. We've got decentralised sewage treatment plants where we're providing recycled water to 10,000 new homes every year. The homes use it for garden watering, toilet flushing, car washing and for washing their clothes. We're also building new recycling plants in old suburbs for both stormwater and sewage. We've also the same analysis has led us to create a waste-to-energy plant. This facility is tacked onto one of our sewage treatment plants, and producers of food waste pay us to combine their waste with our waste to produce green energy at a profit to my company. None of this existed 10 years ago, and most has come out of our broader understanding about the true value of water. So where do we need to go? So while we've made some good progress in terms of ensuring that our price does cover some of the values that Sasha mentioned before, we've still got a fair way to go. We need to include, for instance, a better assessment of indirect ecosystem services, and we've engaged True Cost in London to help us do exactly this. We need to do a better job on consultation with our customers. In the previous seminar I was at, there was an African proverb that said, if you want to go quickly, go on your own. If you want to go further, then go together. Well, we've been a little bit guilty of going too quickly on our own, and we need to slow down a little bit and consult more. We need to capitalise on all of our learning from these projects I've talked about, the recycling of stormwater, sewage, etc., the energy production. We need to integrate those more and scale them up. And we also need better government policy support to our whole approach. This in turn will allow our regulators to include externalities in our prices, which are not always the case. But most importantly, I think we need to keep experimenting. We need to keep learning and keep collaborating with all our stakeholders to improve awareness of the consequences of our consumption and hopefully achieve mutually beneficial results for them and the environment. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ronnie. As we've heard, at least the last two speakers have been giving a strong voice for the need, or at least the usage, or the good use of pricing as a mechanism to control demand. I would like to ask our final speaker another question, or rather a similar question. Why don't you think that we can price? Why is pricing not a good way? And why can't you price the human right to water? David Boyce from Public Services International.
Thank you, Jens, and thank you, Tony, for not having a PowerPoint so that I don't have to be the only one who doesn't have a PowerPoint, which means you have to pay attention to me rather than the pictures. I represent the workers in public services in 150 countries. We work across all sectors, whether it's water and sanitation, energy, health, transport, municipal and national services. And one of the basic things that we understand as a trade union movement is that if you and your families don't have access to quality public services, your life is likely to be fairly miserable. So if you can't get health care when your 45-day-old child is in trouble, then you know how much you'll suffer. If those health problems are because the water you drink is polluted, that makes it even worse. And again, we all know that a good education, a safe environment to live in, access to energy, all of these that most of us in this room take for granted, if we look at the history of the North, most of them are developed by public spending and public management, because it's about the rights for all rather than the ability of those to pay to access these core services. So the history that the North has seen in development is absolutely dependent on public services, but what we're seeing in the South is that we're trying to impose the market and to force people to pay for services. Now, clearly those unserved in urban settings is the area that our members know more. Those unserved by the networks in developing countries, but also in a number of northern countries, they pay more either through the SIPs, the small-scale independent providers, or with their health and livelihoods, and especially impacting women. Again, in urban settings, public service delivery, if effective and honest, is always cheaper than private. There's no inherent need for profit maximization. Cost of capital is cheaper. Transaction costs are less. There is less likelihood of capital flight. There's less gaming of the regulators. There's no commercial secrecy. There's less fighting over intellectual property rights, patents, and trademarks. And I think we've seen the dangers when your main motive is profit maximization. Too many corners get cut, too much gets swept under the rug, including social and environmental issues. These are barriers to profits. So what we've also seen, regrettably, because again, we represent the workers across the spectrum, and when they get privatized, we still represent them. But what we've seen is that the private operators can be unreliable because, well, what if the stock market changes, forces them to sell all their subsidiaries and retrench back to their home base? We've seen it all over the place. Or in one famous case, when the CEO decides to bet the company on movies and entertainment. This 5-10 years ago, the talk in this room and around here was all about Suez, Veolia, Thames, and United Water. They were the darlings, just like Enron was the darling of the energy sector. Then it was, a little bit later, it was the SIPs. Now it's DPSP, domestic private sector participation. So I think we're constantly amazed at the faith and influence of the neoliberal ideologies, who want to shrink government to its smallest possible size. Now, I'm assuming that many of these neoliberal thinkers got a good education at a public school. They probably had a good public university. They probably had public water and sanitation in their homes. And they probably had access to modern energy services. But I think also for us, it calls into question what sort of democracy are we trying to spread around the world when we want to shrink government to its smallest possible size. So when we're looking to urban domestic water and sanitation, for us, it's got to be public. We have to strengthen our public institutions, and we have to strengthen our local public institutions, which, again, in this environment, is possibly too tricky for the donors. We see a lot of donors around the room, and they like to flag projects, but there's also a massive push from national governments to reinvent tied aid. How can we use our donor money for contracts for our companies? And that continues to be a reality, and so it calls a big question for that policy. Now, let's be clear. The workers in the water utilities recognize that if your utility runs out of money, a few things happen. You cut investment in maintaining the infrastructure, which makes our job much harder. You cut our wages, our training, and our occupational health and safety equipment because that costs money. You outsource as much as you can to cut the cost of the labor force, even when it means violating labor rights. You may cut off non-payers, and you cut corners on quality and reliability. So we recognize, the workers, that if we want a good career, there has to be money in the system, and it's got to come from somewhere. So if there's a solid, progressive tax base, and if you have enough tax collectors, they're also our members, then much can be paid from here. And that's, frankly, about the tax collectors, that's not a joke. You have to have very professional people who can process the taxes. But it requires tax justice, which it appears the international community is finally waking up to. We've got to shut down all the tax havens and the tax dodgers. Because guess what? It's not my members, the salaried stiffs, who can dodge taxes. It's not the poor who have informal economy income who dodge taxes. So who's dodging the taxes? So this is, again, a fundamental political reality that we've got to deal with if we want to have just and equitable societies. Tariffs play a role, but full cost recovery is a barrier to extending services to the many unserved. This is confirmed by history in the North and contemporary tales from the South. Agreed that a certain level of tariffs can produce a sense of ownership, commitment, entitlement, as long as it's not too onerous and doesn't lead to all of these humiliating means-tested subsidies. And again, I'm speaking in a lot of short terms that the people in the policy world will, I hope, understand. Those who don't, you can ask me questions later. But our principle, and I guess everybody would agree, is those who can afford should pay more. Those who profit from water as an input should pay more. That includes the externalities we're talking about. And clearly, as some of the graphs from our first speaker after Netafim showed, business industry and agro-industry are some of those. But it's often the case that those who can afford the most are the ones who can afford the lawyers and the lobbyists and the politicians to make sure they don't pay the most. And that's a reality in this world. Demand management can be a tool, but if we're putting the impact of the impact of a focus on domestic, on household, you're missing the game. And that's what the award to Netafim shows. The game is agriculture. But in terms of a public utility, it's not only or always pricing tools. You have, as a public utility, you have the ability to reach into every single household. And you can use that for public awareness raising. And if the public is aware that your #1 priority is not profit maximization, you might get a little bit more leverage from then. So agree that the business and industry and agro-industry needs different pricing and different signals. Because once you're in the for-profit arena, it's pricing and costs that are your key determinants of behavior. But it brings a lot of the questions about land ownership, land grabbing, rights of investors versus rights of inhabitants. I think that some of these issues, Jens, we still need to explore, possibly after in the discussion. Thanks.
Thank you very much, David. It sounds to me like we will have a very fascinating and inspired debate after the coffee break. So Thank you very much for attending this first part. Now it's time for coffee. Please be back in this room. We will have audience participation and we will have a full row of very intelligent and eloquent speakers. Thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. It's great to see that the eyes of you have gone up a bit after all the coffee you drank during the coffee breaks. I'm sure you'll stay awake. I'm also sure that this afternoon's discussion will keep you awake. It will be intense, I have a feeling. Well, let's see about that. I felt I didn't really introduce all the speakers earlier well enough, so I'll call them up on stage with a better presentation of them, and I'll go in the order and the way they presented. So first up, Mr. Eagle Eyes. Oh, sorry. They're all so eager to be discussing this. I actually thought that, Eagle, you could sit here. It will look like you wear this as a crown. I was getting comments that people didn't see from the other side. I hope no images sort of reflect badly on you. You won the prize. Very well received. Our next speaker was Alexander Sasha Sender, who is from Triple Z and Switzerland. You could sit next to him. Then we have Mr. Desigen Naido from the Water Research Commission of South Africa. Great to have you here. We have Mr. Anthony Cox from the OECD, and he will be flanked by a fellow Aussie, Mr. Tony Kelly from Yarra Valley Water. And then last but not least, David Boyce from Public Services International, wearing a cap for the day. If you don't see David, you'll have to ask him to lift the cap a bit. Great, great. So, before we start, I actually wanted to check some things out with you, because I was impressed by the speakers and their presentations. I also felt that to sort of look where you stand in the audience, what you feel about this, I thought we should have some kind of hand raising. And one of the things that actually was mentioned, I would say, by both Sasha and Desigen, was that there are different values of water and different uses of water, and some water use maybe we could or should price, whereas some other water use we couldn't or we shouldn't price. So I just wanted to check with you what you think about this, and feel free to raise your hands as well. So if we go by sort of taking the basic, what I would say constitutes the human right, the water you use for your daily survival, how many in here do you think that we should price that kind of water use? Raise your hands. Okay, did you get the question right? Interesting. So, if we then go to sort of less, the water use where you sort of use to wash your cars and fill your swimming pools, how many of you think you should pay for that kind of water? Oh, even more. Okay, so if we take sort of the use of water when you produce something that is sold, either being foodstuff or being clothes or diamonds or energy, how many of you think you should pay for that kind of water? It depends, okay. Oh yes, I will ask specifically then about agriculture. Water for agriculture, I'm thinking here, not really the water for the subsistence farmers, because it's very hard to put a price tag on the rain. So rain-fed agriculture, I won't count into this. But the water that is withdrawn to irrigate your lands, how many in this room? And also, if you are on the web, you can raise your hands. I might not see you, but I'll count your votes anyway. How many in here believe that you should pay for agricultural water? Oh. Consumers should. Well, but okay, we have people here saying that food consumers should pay, and I think that will then happen. Good, interesting. I get a feeling that most in here think that we should pay for water, and I think that I'll try to argue against what you feel, just to sort of get the discussion going a bit. You will be able to ask questions later on. We have 2 microphones in the room, and I will be sort of guiding them to the right person to pose a question. But you have to be a bit patient, because we have to get started with a panel discussion first. One of the things maybe that could also be explained a bit better, and I think I'll pose the first question to Igal. We know, some people have said, even though it was shown by both Tony and Anthony, that consumers, the users of water, respond to different sort of pricing very easily, in a sense, or rapidly. When you put a certain price, they lower their use. Is it the same thing in agriculture? And I know that you have solutions for certain types of agriculture, at least what you said, the tomatoes and other things that we grow, the cash crop, it seems, but also from the larger scale of agriculture. Would there be ways, because if it's inelastic, if the farmers would use the same amount of water because they need it to produce what they have to produce, it doesn't really matter what price we put on it, because they will anyway use the water. So are there any ways in your technologies that could also be sort of for the grander use of water, for the sort of staple crops? You mentioned rice, you mentioned, how far are you ahead in this? And could you actually improve also to be able to reduce demand of agriculture, also to improve the water use in that part? You will have microphones in the buckets next to you. Please speak into them, otherwise the people watching us on the web won't be able to hear a thing.
Okay. Is it working? I think it is. In a word, yes, elasticity exists. And I think that literature, for the most part, supports the notion that there is certain elasticity that affects the use of water by the farming sector. Now, I've seen that through my own eyes in California. I spent next to 8 years in California, where the price of water in many water districts, and we need to know, I guess there are a few Americans here in the room, that there is no way to talk about California as if the cost of water is uniform. It is not. But in the course of the years I spent in California, between 2002 and 2009, big things happened. Energy crisis, food inflation, and that kind of things that affected the cost of water. When the cost of an acre foot in certain district waters moved from $10 to $20 an acre foot, which is an absurd, price. When it moved to $40 or to $60, so we're talking about 100 to 200%, very little to nothing happened. So elasticity at that point in time was 0. But then the prices kept going up. And in certain water districts, the change was from 20 to 200. You could see the change. And by the way, nobody has to be surprised by that, because, water is like most everything else. The cost of gas moved from $1 to $2, and practically nothing happened. Again, I'm talking about US at those times. But when it moved to 4, a lot of things started to change. So yes, there is elasticity. My issue, and here I am sure that I will turn it over to people that will have some interesting views on that, is that the observation that water is a local issue is true, it is absolute, and we sometimes tend to forget that and get into discussions that confuse that. Netafim is involved in many countries in the world, but the 2 leading countries in our business are 2 opposites, US and India. And I'm no expert. I spent quite a lot of time in India, and as I said before, I spent years in the US, but I'm still no expert. My observation is that these are 2 universes. And in most parts of India, when the central and state government subsidizes farming, they don't have to subsidize water specifically. Sometimes they subsidize pumps, which obviously encourages some overuse of water, et cetera, et cetera. But as far as I can judge, when food subsistence level is the top agenda of the society, governments not only will, because they should find ways to make that resource available really at no cost, and find different ways to allocate it. That is possible. But making people pay for the water they are pumping in a farm in India, let's just put it straightforward. A farm in India, I'm making a broad generalization, maybe 1 hectare. And that farmer applying for subsidies to buy our equipment, after filling paperwork let me show you, this high, is for $1,000. And that guy will not pay for the price of water. And if the government wants to do allocations, which it has to do, should find different ways.
Thank you very much. Oh, also a reminder to all of you in this room, when you leave the room, don't forget to switch on your mobile phones, because in here they have to be switched off. Thank you. If you're expecting an important call, that is. Yes, Desigan, and everybody wants to speak now. Would you like to say something first, then, Sasha, so we go in the same order on the same issue?
Well, agriculture is actually always the elephant in the room, basically. We have been talking mostly about anything else than agriculture, and you were the only one who was actually elaborating it. Agriculture is a little bit more complicated. Because first of all, I think we have to look first to where go the agriculture products to. They go to us. And we are not willing to pay a lot for food. And our unwillingness to pay for food actually forces governments to subsidize. So basically, we pay through our taxes what you have to do. So you cannot do a market with running almost entirely on subsidies. And the US, you know, also California, for example, this is what you say is for the surface water right. But the groundwater can be pumped without metering. And when you go to the western part of the US, where a lot of irrigation is in the place, the farmer's price, if they have kind of, we talk about staple food, not the speciality and so, the staple food prices are actually controlled by the global prices and so. That's what the farmer can get. And then you can just calculate back how much elasticity is in there to ask for water. And I can tell you it's very, very little. And we have looked into what's happening in the western part of the US and also in China. The moment your water price increases and the staple food goes above the costs of the world market price, the farmers leave their land. So it is not really linearly, or you have kind of a hub over which you have to go that you start to decrease or to increase productivity. It's much, much more complicated. And I think if we talk about agriculture, we have to talk about agriculture of what and where. And it is different in India. I'm totally with you there. But it is even in the US, wherever you go, it's from state to state, it's different. You go to Canada, it's once again totally different. The whole farming in Canada, at least in the western part of Canada, can only survive the irrigation farming because of high subsidy, because the whole infrastructure is put into place. And this is the country which delivers a lot of food for the rest of the world. So just say agriculture has to pay for the water, irrigation water, not rainwater, is a little bit too simplified, and we have really to look specifically what we are talking about. I think in the luxurious parts, fruits and so, you have a certain elasticity. When it comes to the staple food, the world market price, and this is the rain-fed actually price of agriculture, controls how much pressure you can put on the farmers.
Okay, interesting. I think we also have another discussion maybe here in a sense then that if it's so, and I believe you're right, that agriculture is very subsidized, maybe the discussion should not be if we should put a price on the water, but maybe first start reducing the subsidies for agriculture. I'm sure Anthony would second that issue. I also, over lunch, talked to Tony, and you had an interesting story of how the agriculture in the area where you operate has actually changed due to your valuing on water. Could you repeat that for the rest of the audience, please?
So the markets in Australia have been in place for 20 years, as Anthony mentioned, and so it's a pretty mature market. But what's happened over that period of time, and it does take time, the markets, as they've evolved, the farmers that are getting high-value crops can afford to buy the water in times of scarcity. So what that's doing, of course, is effectively restructuring agriculture. So the farmers that get low-value products are moving out of the market. So in our case, it's mostly dairy farmers for milk. So they're being priced out of that market, and they're having to move to areas which have high rainfall. because they simply can't afford to buy the water in the markets that they're currently located. So, you know, it's working, but it takes a long time. It's taken 20 years, and in that 20 years, it hasn't been a completely free market. It's actually been quite controlled, and those controls over time have been reduced and reduced as the market has matured.
Interesting. So that means that by putting a price on water, you're actually changing the structure of society in a sense, by moving people and actually their activities around. And I guess the economists, I will give the floor to Anthony soon, would say that that is, of course, sort of increasing the efficiency of the economy. But I'll let you sort of explain more what that means. Sort of what is good with this moving around and moving places to where there's more water and the basic resource that people rely on?
Well, I think there's a few points I'd like to make here. First of all, I agree that agriculture does differ around the world and between countries and within countries. But talking of, you know, subsidising water use in agriculture for sustainability, for sustenance, for the basic needs, is fine. But we have to remember that water resources are depletable. There is a sustainability issue in the longer term. So we have to find solutions that enable the food security goals to be met, as well as the water security goals. The other thing about agriculture subsidies is that it highlights the fact that water is not in a box on its own. You're interacting with other policies. Many countries have distorted agricultural support policies, which change the nature of production, which do not reflect the relative resource endowments or the relative costs of producing those agricultural commodities in those countries. So that by removing those kind of distortions, you're more likely to have an agricultural production patterns that reflect the sustainability, or more likely to reflect the sustainability of the resource endowments that you have. And some of those subsidies support water-intensive activities. For example, rice production in Australia has had the pattern of that has changed dramatically over the last 10 years, both as a result of the drought, but also as a result of the water markets being in place. So you need to think outside the water box in terms of these pricing and support policies.
Thank you very much. I have another question. I think I'll give this to Des again, because you raised the issue of entitlements. And if we, as most people in this room seem to think, should put a price on water, I mean, if you buy something, you own it. And wouldn't that also give the same sense of entitlement? So if I can pay for my water, being a company, being something else, it's mine. Why should that, when the drought comes, when the people out in the suburbs don't get their drinking water, why should I relinquish my right to water that I have bought? Wouldn't that give the same kind of entitlement as the constitutional right, if we can pay for our water, the ones of us who are rich enough to do that?
Well, thanks, Jens. You denied me the opportunity of making some very controversial statements about agriculture.
Oh, so, you can do them as well. Feel free. You have the microphone. I won't take it away from you, unless you speak for too long.
Well, let's answer your question first, and then maybe I'll create a space for some of those. It depends on the kind of system you put into place. If you have a system where South Africa uses a licensing system, if you have an unconditional license, then you fall exactly into the trap that you're talking about. Then there is an entitlement, there is an ownership for a specific period of time. If you have a conditional license that says, in a water-scarce catchment, if you are not using the water within these benchmarks over this period of time, then the license is actually revoked. It then puts pressure on the correctness of behavior. Unfortunately, our licensing system hasn't been rolled out yet, so I can't give you a decent case study of how this will actually work. And part of the problem is that for 14 years, we've been working out the right kinds of protocols to get these conditionalities to play. And this is, well, I guess initially it was a naivety that everyone wanted the same goal. We got over that fairly quickly, but now realizing that the steep slope of the current people with the entitlements, as opposed to the people who need the new water, hasn't got the right kind of power balance in place to make that happen. But in theory, this is possible. And you were talking about the basin experiences where you are. It sounds very encouraging. But if I can return to the agriculture very briefly, because this needs to be unpacked. I mean, I come from a country that recently, in the past 5 years, had very, very large judgments by the Competition Commission around collusion by large companies that use the end products of agriculture. We also have done a couple of studies with an institution called the National Agricultural Marketing Council in South Africa that failed to find the connection between food insecurity in the system with many of our primary products to the agricultural cycle. Because the price determination is neither by the farmer nor by the end user, but the large brokerage mechanism that goes in between. So I think we need to really unpack that in its proper place. The second thing I think that needs to be considered, we all talk about wasteful agriculture as far as water practice is concerned, and this is true for many parts of the world. But you also have to consider what agriculture does in your economy. So if you were taking water away from agriculture, are you going to be putting it into the right kind of sector that's going to provide the industrial activity that counts? Will it absorb the right numbers of people so that you have job creation continuing rather than diminishing? And what is the social cost associated with that? And that's very important to consider. And then the last controversial point I wanted to make is that I think you have to give consideration to whether or not your agricultural practice is in fact enhancing a national security, perhaps primarily a food security, and where it is not. Because the higher users of water in many of our systems are for export agriculture, and sometimes we find very strange situations of hugely water-stressed countries exporting their water in this kind of manner. And you really have to work out in that domain whether or not you're making the right decisions for a system. Sometimes you would be. Sometimes getting the right export market does fulfill all of the economic ends that you're looking at. But you do have to do that analysis. So I think I agree that agriculture is complex to look at. And unfortunately, in many of our systems, the most disempowered member in that entire chain happens to actually be the farmer.
So we have two systems that are very complex. We heard before that sort of pricing of water is a very complex issue, and then complexity is then enhanced by the complexity of the entire agricultural system. And to trying to sort of pull the threads here, we might get ourselves into a big knot, I guess, unless we do it right, of course, which we hope we should do. I have first a question for David, actually. And this is... I saw in the room that most people wanted sort of also the poorest people to pay for their water. And couldn't that be a good idea? I mean, you could subsidize sort of the unserved in other ways, for example, providing them access by subsidizing the piping to them, but they pay for each liter they use. Couldn't that be a good idea?
Well, first of all, I'll explain the secret of my cap to everybody. Not only today am I proud to wear the cap of the South African Municipal Workers Unions, but it's because my lovely baby blues have become very light sensitive. And this is the only other option I have is to wear sunglasses, which I think is even ruder than wearing a cap inside. So that's my secret. Well, look, if you're going to say anybody who doesn't have access now, we'll provide you the pipe and we'll put a meter. Well, the cost of putting that meter is probably going to cost more than the money you're going to get back from them. So I don't know, maybe you've got a sideline in a meter engineering company, but I would be very reluctant of going down that road. I'm going to take advantage of having the microphone to respond to a couple of issues here. First of all, the unwillingness to pay more for food. I'm a Canadian. In winter, a red pepper costs me $3. In the summer, I can pay $1 for it because it's produced in Ontario. But in the winter, I can't, and I will buy it. Now, maybe I won't buy 5 of them, but I will be paying for food. That but the point is it depends on my income as well. And luckily enough, I'm not one of the plantation workers whose wages and working conditions are miserable, and who don't even have access to water when they're working on the plantations. Now, is that because the profits that need to be brought out of that plantation have to be taken off their backs? Again, I think we need to look at, in agriculture, biofuels. What are we willing to pay for that? How much land and water? Bottled water is a huge issue that we haven't touched, and the marketing machinery and profits behind that. Sugar water, again, how much should we pay for that? We touched on, very gently, on the agricultural subsidies. What about the EU Common Agricultural Policy? I now live in France. I pay for this. Am I getting value for my money? I doubt it. And same with the U.S. U.S. agricultural subsidies. Then, when it comes to trading water, what about the case of T. Boone Pickens in the USA and how he was so quick to jump on the speculation? Somebody mentioned briefly the commodity brokers. I'm now working with the energy union in Paraguay because they want to privatize their national energy system. The sale of energy is the single largest source of income for the government, but their biggest export is soy. Yet because of ADM, Monsanto, Cargill, they can't get any money for Paraguay from the export of that crop because there's a global oligopoly that controls it. So again, we've got to unpack so many issues, whether it's the mass starvation in India that you have to deal with by, they don't subsidize water, but they subsidize electricity for the pumps. Yet, what does that do to the water table? In Colombia, what's the big fight about? It's about land. It's about ownership of land. These guys are fighting about the latifundos who, you know, one guy owns, I don't know how many hundreds of acres. And then finally, what I'm going to put on, again, I mentioned briefly, is this thing of valuing ecosystem services. How are the speculators going to get into that and make $1 billion without adding a single dime to either the planet or to the people?
Thank you. I saw you raise the hand, Tony, before. I would like to give the, and then you will be able to ask questions. I just saw Tony's hands.
Thanks, Jan. I just thought it'd be useful to add another case study here, which picks up a couple of the points that have been made. And that is farmers don't have to stand on their own necessarily. So one of the things that we've done in Melbourne is that we've done a deal with farmers. So our farmers don't get massive subsidies, but they do have to compete on global markets. So they're doing it tough. And the prices they pay for their irrigation infrastructure barely covers the maintenance costs, if that. So they couldn't afford to upgrade their own infrastructure. So what happened was we actually funded the upgrade of their infrastructure, using some of Netafim's products, for instance, to enable them to be much more efficient. So they were getting the same or better productivity out of much less water. The savings that came from that were shared. We got a third. We invested $1 billion in this infrastructure. So we got a third of the savings. The farmers got a third of the savings, which increased their level of security and increased their productivity. And the environment got a third of the water as well. So the rivers got more water. So it's a win for the farmers, a win for us, and a win for the environment. And on top of all that, the price of that water ended up being cheaper than desalinated water. And we also have a desalination plant as well. So there are partnerships which are possible, which could help to justifiably, I think, subsidise farmers to increase their productivity for mutual gain.
Thank you. And just on that, I think since we are also discussing the issue of sort of farming and agriculture, isn't that a huge problem? And I don't really know how to solve it, but maybe you have good examples. I think Anthony maybe can speak to this. That land often comes with the water. That if you own the land, you can pump as much as you want, irrespective of how much your neighbor wants to pump. If there's a race to the bottom, if you pump more, he'll pump more, and then you go straight down there. I see some heads shaking, and I'll give the words first to Anthony.
One of the really clever things the Australian government did 20, 30 years ago, long time ago, was to disentangle property rights. Disconnect property rights from water rights. And so that was one of the fundamental building blocks that they put in place nice and early so that they could then move through a phased, I wouldn't say it was a planned kind of move towards where we are now, but it happened. But to disentangle that means that you're able to change the incentives of the people have. You view water and land as separate inputs to a production process, and you're able to optimise. You know, farmers are very clever at optimising. They know how to use scarce resources. They know how to get along, and this is what laid the groundwork for at least the Australian system to be able to be much more efficient in the way it used both land and water.
Thank you. I said that you would be able to ask questions. Unfortunately, I saw two people on the panel also wanting to comment on this. So while you think about the question you would like to pose, I would ask first Sasha to comment on this.
It's not as simple as you said, and I think there are different. It's not only Australia who is actually wrestling with this issue. South Africa is, Canada is. The problematic is, if you look in a historical way, agriculture came with the land and a certain allocation of water. That was the license, and the license had the so-called fit for license. So the first in time is the first in right. So whoever came after is always behind those who were first. I think in most places now the discussion is clear. We have to split the right of the land, because the farmers can sell the land, but they cannot yet sell the licenses so easily. There is not the real market. It's kind of a shadow market. The prices is not really transparently made, and so you cannot pump as much as you want to. You have a riparian right, that's about an acre-foot when you're living there, so that's not the big issue. So that's highly controlled, and it's controlled by historical points. And to take something away from somebody who has something is kind of, you just have to take it away from him. So if the society wants to do that, the society may have to think to reimburse that person for it. These are only the points. I'm not saying this, I'm totally behind it, but these are the issues you are confronted with if you're dealing with it. Now, let me, because I have the microphone, I will not talk about something different, but actually agriculture is hugely complex, and I think we could talk here for hours on the agriculture part, and we should dissect it in the beginning. But there are other sectors which are probably a little bit easier to get an idea of what the price is and what the costs are, and so, like municipal water, and so maybe some of the question from the public will also go in this direction, where we can then give you a little bit more of our insight.
Thank you. Before we open the floor, Igal.
Yes, briefly. First of all, disclaimer, as business people, we have no objection to pricing water, because if you think about that, this will only actually help the business. But we need to draw a line between our individual view on issues that are political, sometimes philosophical, many times a strong impact on society, and our business stance. And our business stance is we are not taking camps. We are providing technology and supporting people to use water more efficiently. So now we are talking about personal individual views. And here's the point. Riparian rights or first appropriation rights in many countries are not something that governments will mess with. First of all, they cannot, because in legal systems, you need to do through legislation to the point that maybe that is simply anti-constitutional. So going that far, I don't know that any government will try to do. I think the Australian government is doing something extremely interesting. I'm, again, no expert in Australia. We have a significant presence in Australia, and my understanding is that your government is buying water rights from farmers. Now, farmers are actually selling their rights voluntarily. Whether or not this is for life or not, I am not clear about that. I think nobody is, maybe. But the fact is that once the government gets its hands on that water, probably is not going to go back to farmers. So, yes, governments can pay for those rights. And by the way, look, I am unaware of the progress you are doing in South Africa, and we do have a very nice company in South Africa. I recommend we talk about it too. But You know, we have seen, I'm going to tell you one of the most public secrets in the US about utilizing water rights and revoking water rights. There is a concept in the US called use it or lose it. So you get your allocation of water. If you don't use it, you lose it. Guess what? It is a very public secret that in good years, when farmers get more water than the water they can use, the ditches are full of water. They just dump the water to the ditch. So they use it because they don't want to lose it. So ways to game the system are in abundance, already patented all over.
Interesting and scary. I saw that Anthony took up the mic, but I won't give you the chance now. You'll have to put it down again. Thank you. Okay, let me see some hands. I have one here in the middle in yellow. Please state your name, your question, and to whom you would like to pose it.
Sure. Hello, my name is Clay Delana. I work at Chatham House, the Royal Institute for International Affairs in London. We're just started a new dialogue, piece of work, research on price mechanism, possible price mechanisms to incentivize more sustainable consumption in food, water and energy, but also considering the linkages. So I'm very interested in this discussion about both agriculture and utility pricing. My question is probably most to, your name from Tony from the Yarra Valley Company, because in my work on the Middle East, it's often far too politically sensitive to talk about price rises in water and energy. In fact, it could be political suicide. So the beginning point is exactly what some of you have been talking about, is what can the government pay upfront? What kind of capital investments can it make to reduce the actual use over time, because it's the government that is paying the subsidy. Therefore, there is a strong business case now, to put in place long-term infrastructure. And you can make the case that there'll be savings over time. However, for water and for gas, there is not a good concept of what the value is nationally. So I wondered, what the process was in Australia for establishing that value. I think you touched on it in your talk, but I didn't catch it all. So I'm interested to hear, in terms of including the cost, the externalities, the cost to future generations, in fact, use it now or use it later, as a basis for building a national understanding about the value before you raise the price.
Thank you. So let me talk about our experience with the drought. We call it the Millennium Drought. It lasted for over 10 years and had a profound impact on our community. We'd never experienced a drought like that before. Every other time we'd had a drought, it lasted a year and then things were back to normal. This went on for 10 years. So you can imagine the impact that had on the community. So during that period of time, we didn't do much with the price. What we did do, though, is we positioned the drought in the context of climate change, and we had a lot of scientific evidence that we were experiencing climate change and that was causing our problems. The community then rallied behind the cause to save water. We didn't put we could have put the price up. We could have implemented scarcity pricing, but there was quite a debate in the community about, well, that means the rich people can buy their way out of the drought. So there was a bad reaction to that, so we didn't touch the pricing. We concentrated on education and explaining the links between consumption and environmental impacts, etc., and the impacts on farmers and agriculture and our food. We're proud of our food. So making all those links, the community responded magnificently, and we ended up saving about 40% per capita consumption, all through mainly both education and some level of restriction as well. We did restrict the use of water, but that all just reinforced the value of the product. During the drought, though, we were facing some dire circumstance, and we had to increase our supplies. So we did implement this scheme I mentioned with the farmers. We invested in their infrastructure for a share of the savings. On top of that, we built a desalination plant, a very large desalination plant. As soon as the plant was finished, the drought ended, and which I think is always tends to happen. So the plant is sitting there now and we haven't used it, but one day that plant will be very useful and it will be very secure. It provides a great security for our community. A lot of people say it's a white elephant, and I was saying to someone before, complaining about the desal plant is a bit like buying life insurance and complaining you're not dead yet. Because basically it is insurance, and in 10 years that plant will be running flat out and it'll be a statewide resource. Now, the impact on price is it doubled our prices. Over the period from 2008 to just this last July, the prices have gone up about 120%. Now, that hasn't been good news for our customers, but during the drought, building on Sasha's point, people understood much more clearly the value of water. In our urban communities, the impact on local sport was profound. We're a nation that loves to play our sport outdoors. So we were closing sports grounds because they were too dry and too hard because we couldn't water them. The community understood that, water security would preserve that part of our lifestyle. Our gardens were dying. Our magnificent trees in our roads were dying. So people understood, were beginning to understand the broader values that come with water, not just the price. So they've tolerated this price increase. They haven't been happy, and certainly my call centre has ran hot. But by the same token, there's been a general acceptance in the community that because we've achieved a higher level of security, we did need to pay more.
Thank you.
It's a very long answer.
Yeah, and thanks for the long answer. I think it was very good. I think you also made sort of the old proverb is you should never let a good crisis go to waste. And I think you worked on that very well. Let's hope. We shouldn't ask for more crises, though, but they can be useful at times. I want very short questions because I've seen very many hands, and if you can, also short answers. I know you only got 5 minutes in the beginning, but try to restrict your answers now as well. Yes, back.
Thank you. Hans Waldring, Asian Development Bank. A good crisis, a good way to get things going. So in the 82 drought at home, we had farmers had temporary trades going in 1982, and we had permanent transfers in 86. That was ahead of the regulators and legislators because they weren't all organised yet with the legislation regulations. So if you had creative lawyers, you could get things moving, and it was fortunate then that the state caught up with things. The discussion on allocation and entitlement got a bit wobbly. Maybe one of the Aussies could just give a breakdown of the difference between allocation and entitlement to help give clarity there. One of the issues I face when I talk with governments in South Asia, when I talk to them about allocations, is their concerns that allocation will result in trade of water from farmers to cities and decrease, I'm just telling you what their concern is, that will decrease the availability of water to the farming sector. So I'd like to hear your view about why that may or may not be a real issue. Thank you.
By saying your, I'm sort of feeling touched, but I won't be able to give any answers. So could you please direct your answer to someone?
The two gentlemen on the right.
The two gentlemen, the two Aussies. Okay.
So just quickly, yes, there was a concern that the urban utilities, which are relatively wealthy compared to the farming sector, could go in and buy all the water. That's not happened. First of all, the farmers use about 75% of the total available water. Melbourne uses about 8%. So we were never going to buy more than another couple of percent. Why would we? Why would we buy all that water and not have a use for it? So it never eventuated.
And just to touch on the other request for clarification, then in Australia there are two types of water rights. One is an allocation, which is a permanent right. One is an annual entitlement, which you can trade both. The annual entitlement's traded seasonally, obviously. The other smart thing I mentioned that the Australians did, I mentioned the separation of the rights from the water rights from the property rights. The other smart thing they did was make it a proportional right. So there's no absolute amount of water you're entitled to. You're entitled to a share, and this meant that you had a lot of flexibility. In lean years, you got a share of a smaller amount of a total pool of water. In plentiful years, you had a much bigger share. Sorry, a much bigger amount of water for the same share. The other thing is the other point that was made is the Commonwealth government is buying up water. He spent about $4 billion buying water rights a few years ago from farmers on a voluntary basis. They were allocations. They were the permanent rights. So this enabled farmers who wanted to get out of the business to get out. It enabled adjustments to be made. And it gave the Commonwealth water right holder a set of rights they could put back into the environment. They're still figuring out how to work this. They don't know yet. They haven't quite sorted out the rules as to, are they going to be trading like a normal player? Are they going to sell it back to the farmers in bad years, or how are they going to play it? That's still part of the evolution.
I also saw this again, just a small reply, and then also Sasha very shortly. But first, this again.
Thanks, yes. I think that's what you need, and what we try to do, and what other people have tried to do, is to set up this notion of an allocation strategy in a given locality. That you shouldn't just be having bilateral discussions between the regulator and individual groups. The groups inside a catchment need to be having this discussion. And the least thing that's going to come out of that is an appreciation of the water circumstance of the farmer versus the small industry player versus the miner versus the whoever and the whoever. And then you just raise the bar on the understanding of what the different predicaments are, and therefore what the implications of the decisions are. But you also have to front load that with the right kind of support service. So if you want someone to make an adjustment on the allocation, so the farmer gets 30% less in a new round than the previous round, then there must be the right kind of support system that organizes for that farmer not to have productivity loss in that period of time. Because if you do, you simply extend the victim list on your system, and you could be in a much worse place than you started off with.
Interesting. Sasha?
Just a simple recipe for the question you are asked is actually, in agriculture, water gets lost through evapotranspiration in the plant. If the city is run right, it returns more than 90% of the water back into the system. So the city will never, ever, if it's run right, take the water away from agriculture. There you have the answer.
Nice one. Thank you. Tony Allen.
Thank you very much. Can I just quickly on Australia say that putting a non-market in doesn't come cheap. 4 billion, and it's about 3 times as much as that. So you've got to have very deep pockets. The attention of the Prime Minister of the time was on this case, and he had deep pockets, and it was possible. So putting in a non-market doesn't come cheap. Putting in a proper market, I presume, is impossible. But the question I would like to ask, in this room by chance, over the past 3 or 4 years, we've had meetings at which I've asked the same question, and I'm asking it in your presence as well, because you've got a position in convening programs. Why is it, if 90% of the water which is used by us is in our food, embedded in our food, and that's 90% of that is managed by farmers, the other 10% is corporations and other people, but a huge volume of water is managed by farmers, not by engineers and other people. Why is it that we don't have them here? Please, can we sometime in the near future, next year preferably, have a meeting in which the farmers who manage water have a voice? Because clearly trying to manipulate them with incentives which economists care about and other things, you know, they're the people that have got to be dealt with.
I totally agree with you. I think the reason why they're not here is they're probably out tilling their fields or cutting the grass and things like that.
No, yes, you're right in that. But we need to get someone here, because otherwise the water people talk nonsense.
Absolutely. Sorry, I didn't hear the last part there before I said absolutely. No, the water people don't talk nonsense. But it's also interesting to talk with the farmers. Absolutely. Before I let out another round on hands, please show me your hands in a while. But one of the things that I would like to also talk about, and the thing that I think it's we haven't even touched upon here, is that a lot of the water in the world is not controlled by just one nation. So if we're going to put a price on water, we have the issue of transboundary. And often, also us water people here, we would think the catchment is the natural area in which you would sort of do these kinds of things in trading of water. But unfortunately, the countries of the world and the municipalities of the world doesn't really follow the catchments. We know most people in this room and probably also watching think that's wrong, but that's the way it is. So how would you, in such a situation where you actually have different countries owning, so to say, the same water, how could you then allocate it rightly? And could you have a price there somewhere? And how could that work? If there's anybody of you who wants to raise your hand and respond to that, and then I'll be looking for hands out in the audience. Okay, Sasha first.
Now you touch a very delicate point. I think it has something to do with the power structure in the basin. And I just give you 3 examples of this basin very shortly. The Nile, where Egypt is the power, but it's downstream. Then you have Euphrates and Tigris, where Turkey is the power and it's upstream. Or the Mekong, where China is the power and it's upstream. And if you have upstream the politically strong power, it will not get into a discussion with you into the price. That has to be done in totally different ways. And Egypt is trying to do that in the whole Nile area, and also specifically Sudan is not so important, but Ethiopia. And the relation between Ethiopia and Egypt is very difficult. But they are working on it. They're working on it politically for many decennia now. And I think they somehow handle it to keep it, not in a nice way, but they keep it running. I think Euphrates and Tigris, specifically during the intervention of the US, was very difficult. It was very difficult for Iraq because they had on the first part, they had the US bombing their water infrastructure in Iraq, and secondly, Turkey controlling the flow of the rivers. They were in a really bad situation. And that is the power structure. And I would say that has more to do with geopolitics than with a price on that level.
Okay, thank you. This again, I know that South Africa also buys some of its water from your neighbors, at least from Lesotho, if I'm not misinformed. So you have some kind of knowledge of this, also pricing, I guess, because you pay a price for the water that you get from Lesotho, eh?
Indeed we do. I think there are 2 kinds of models at play. The one model that Sasha referred to, where one ex-head of state said all you need is a treaty from the 50s signed by somebody who had no interest there, and a very large air force, and you pretty much have it.
Maybe not the way you would sort of propose to people to solve this.
There was in fact a member of the South African government of national unity was acting president for all of 3 days, and he invaded Lesotho actually. It was a very amusing set of circumstances. but what the Lesotho Highlands project demonstrates, and what the entire Senku Orange Basin Authority demonstrates, is what is possible when sanity comes to the table. Yeah? But you got to have a very clear notion of the codependency. They really have to be partners in need. So part of the price that South Africa pays for water, and I'm not a diplomat, so I'm crashing through many stores of China here. Part of the price that South Africa pays for water from the Katsi is a contribution to the Lesotho GDP, in currency about 60% of the GDP, that ensures that a lot of people remain in Lesotho, as opposed to becoming economic refugees inside South Africa. You know, these are factors, and they have to come into the thinking about how you construct this. The relationship with Botswana and Namibia is sophisticated on completely other levels. So we have a couple of examples of places around the world where you could have the kind of mutual benefit arrangement that really works. But the places where those arrangements get seriously tested is when you have scarcity. You know, for a while, the ZAC plan on the Zambezi was claimed to be one of the best sharing mechanisms of water in the world, until we had 3 years of successive droughts, and then it all started to fall apart. So, in fact, the ZAC plan was working so well for a time that we were even talking about virtual water in that part of the world, where we were talking about moving the bread baskets out of water-scarce areas like South Africa into then water-rich areas like Zimbabwe. I mean, that's as far as the conversation actually went. So many things are really possible, but it has to have this kind of relationship around it. The issue about the price is one factor. The issue about the dynamic of the politics and the power play is a completely different factor. And I think that all of those things need to come into the mix when you're trying to work this out.
Very nice. I'm not trying to sort of wrap things up here, just you will get questions, but an idea came to my mind, what we have been talking about here. You say we need sort of collaboration a lot. We also talked before that you shouldn't have a good crisis go to waste, and also that scarcity makes cooperation much more difficult. And there are, of course, solutions also especially for agriculture, to increase productivity and then get more water. So if I see sort of the future ahead of me, first, a big crisis, so we get the sort of awareness up. Then we put in the right technology into place, so that we get sort of increase the amount of water that we can share, and then we can start working on the difficult sort of legal issues that are needed to be addressed in order to move forward. Does that sound like a decent idea? It's just off the top of my head, so don't quote me on this one, please. Yes.
I'm not so sure about the order of things, but that's a start. Just on, I think that's going to raise the very good dimension on water as and those kind of transfers as a political strategic issue and trying to get cooperation that way. Another angle I'd put out there, and this gets to the issue of price versus value, is where you want to have cooperation in a transboundary river basin, you need a good information base. So you need an essential precondition for cooperation is a shared information base. And while there's certainly a physical dimension to that, what are the hydrological resources? What's the economic resources? What is the economic potential of it? Values come in there, not so much prices, but certainly values. Getting a conversation around shared values where you can and where those values are not shared. That at least moves the conversation along and gives you a much better base for moving forward. So this is where I think the valuation issue comes to the fore here.
Thank you. We only have 15 more minutes of this session, so I would like to invite for more questions, but please keep them very short and the same also answers. Yes, over there.
Detlef Klein, GIZ, Germany. I would like to ask, to which degree do you think should we include also the pricing issue on water use in the sense of discharging wastewater? I have the impression that we discuss a lot from the perspective of withdrawal of fresh water, and how would this change when we think about this aspect? I think in many water laws it's the same issue in reality. It's another type of water use, and if we consider all the variety of water uses through diffuse or punctual discharges, I think there's already a large, it's a large weight which should be given compared to the aspect of freshwater withdrawal. What is your estimate on that?
Thank you. I saw you didn't really direct it at somebody, and I'll take the liberty to respond slightly also. I know that here in Stockholm, most of the fee that we pay for our water doesn't go to sort of pipe the water into our taps, but actually to treat it afterwards. That's what we really pay for here in Stockholm. So it's a very good question. Oh, Igal first.
Very briefly. First of all, wastewater is one of the water sources that has been, for the most part, untapped yet. And it's here. We own it. Most of the wastewater, not in all countries, for sure, most of it yet is being treated. So there is some cost applied to disposing of wastewater. But my point, and I'm going to take that side because I'm sure that people here in the panel will cover everything else, is again about making the availability of the water resource in the planet bigger than it is. There are two ways to go about wastewater. One is disposal, the other one is reuse. And now, we need to remember that in both cases, in most cases, that has a cost. Because for people to dispose wastewater, just dump it in a stream or the river or the sea without treating it, well, in many countries that will be a crime. So you're going to pay for that basic treatment. Now, with additional treating of that water can be put to work. It doesn't mean that you will be able to drink it, which is possible, but then you'll have to invest much more. But you can certainly reuse it for irrigation purposes. It can be irrigating the turf. It can be irrigating crops that are not eatable crops. Cotton could be. Some of the energy so-called crops today that go actually to the ethanol industry. So there are many ways to put that water back to work. And probably, before we talk about the way to charge for disposal, I would say, talking to what comes first, that the most important question is how do we recover that water and put it to work?
Thank you. Sasha.
Yeah, just go further from here. You know, we have the saying, the polluter pays, and so they pay for it. It's they have to pay for the pollution of the water, and that has been in Europe and in North America long time already in working. There are other models who are discussed in the sense of that you have to pay for the water which you abstract. Say a municipality abstracts a certain amount of water. And when it returns that water in the same quality, it will you will take it off the price, like that. So then actually those who have the water and pollute it, they are actually getting interested in to do something which they can actually make money out of it. And everything you said are ways of getting cheaper the water away from them so they have part of the cost recovery. I don't think that we have thought it all through these models, but the idea basically behind is to make an economic incentive that with the water you abstract, you have to pay beforehand because you take it. And then you are reimbursed if you give it back in the same quality, or you can do something else with it. And once you can do something else, then it becomes interesting to think about solutions which are economically interesting and beneficial for you. So that actually triggers the innovation. And I think we are very often kind of a little bit short on these triggers on the innovation. And we build up all these theories around, instead of letting the people think, make a construct which actually, at the end of the day, pays for innovation. And then it will work. And it will work in most cases. Most, not always.
Thank you. Anthony.
I don't think it's rocket science. I think Sasha touched on the key point. It's the polluter pays principle. If you charge people for discharging polluted water, creates an incentive to not discharge, and that creates an incentive to reuse the wastewater. And I totally agree that the wastewater resource is the great untapped resource. I think it's the next step for us as a planet is to get much better at reusing and recycling water, and bringing that into our regulatory frameworks and bringing that into our pricing frameworks and into the business models of our water utilities. A few hurdles to overcome, social acceptability being one of them. There's lots of cases around the world where new water or recycled water there are communities place limits on what it can be used for, but I think we haven't tested the boundaries on that. But changing the incentives is the key, and that will drive innovation, and that will drive change.
Thank you. Tony.
So in Melbourne, we do charge for the wastewater. What we do is all our properties are metered. People pay per cubic metre of water going through the meter. Then we estimate how much of that has gone into the sewer, and we charge customers accordingly. Now, on aggregate, that's quite accurate, but for individual households, that's not accurate generally. And it's very complicated for our customers to understand it. So that's an issue for us. But we are doing a lot more recycling, as I mentioned in my presentation. We've got a number of sewage treatment plants on the boundary of our area, which are too remote from the central infrastructure, and we're now producing recycled water out of those treatment plants. And we're putting that recycled water back into new homes, and we're charging a potable water price has a three-step price. So the more you use, the more you pay. The recycled water is at the lowest tier of that price to encourage the use of that water. And then when you talk about social acceptability, it's interesting that what happened when we first put that water in, one of our developers who was putting in a new area of new homes, came to us with the proposal. Initially, we didn't like it. Then we did like it when we did the analysis. What happened was that those properties became drought-proofed, and it became a huge competitive advantage for that developer. And very quickly, all the neighbouring developments wanted to have the recycled water. Otherwise, they couldn't sell their homes. So in terms of social acceptability, it was just a no-brainer in the end.
Interesting. Yes, David.
Just quickly, first of all, ladies, I'm going to share a very inside story. When you go to the urinal here, it flushes before and after. This is really bizarre. I'm sorry, ladies. But maybe it reflects the excess funds in Stockholm to flush before and after. And I assume it doesn't flush straight out into all your lovely fjords.
We don't have many fjords in Stockholm, unfortunately.
So anyway, sorry. What we see clearly is when the investments are decided for especially slums, we see possibly investment for drinking water and domestic water, but not for sewage. The money just isn't there. It's too big. And this is something, again, are we going to try to figure out how the market's going to deal with it? So I'm hearing around here a lot of things about, well, you look at all the nutrients and minerals that are in wastewater and how can we extract them and sell them on. I suspect that's going to take a lot of time to, for example, encourage Sabesp, Sao Paulo, to actually treat the water. It doesn't, yet it pays dividends. So there's that issue. Fertilizers and pesticides for crops are a huge problem for the public utilities if they're in the way to clean them out, and it costs a ton of money. Do we pay? Do the farmers pay? Who pays? And you know, what about the companies selling the fertilizers and the pesticides in the first place? Because they're making good money off theirs. And then finally, fracking. The shale gas exploration, which takes hundreds and hundreds of thousands of liters of water, and there's a lot of concern about what's left underground, that we have no idea of what the chemicals are. And there's actually a lot of push to oppose that.
Thank you. This again.
A quick addition. In the country where acid mine water is a severe issue, this is a very simple discussion. But one has to be quite sophisticated about the innovation you use at the other end of the system. And there's a fair amount of work that's happening all around the world, actually, around setting up the right kind of industrial ecology to make the reuse that you're talking about possible. Because reuse within the system and getting into the right kind of standard to do so is usually very difficult. But you can have a system of players that move along the chain that need different qualities of water to be able to do their fundamental activities. And if you do it quite right, you can set up a really good system. I mean, we have an example in a place in Mpumalanga in South Africa where it gets treated by a series of partners coming first out of a coal mine to a sufficient standard to sell back to a municipality. So there are possibilities. It depends on how you deal with it.
Thank you. I see that the time has been running a lot, so unfortunately I will not invite you to pose any more questions. I'm very sorry, but I would like to give all the panelists the chance to, for less than a minute, give your final word. And you could use, if you want to go first, Sasha, you can do that.
It's not the final word, but David put David put the finger on something which is a hot issue, and it's actually, I'm happy that he asked this question, and that's the fracking. The fracking is around now in all the discussions in the water sector, and we haven't touched it. And the fracking is now, in my eyes, fracking is a typical case for lack of regulation and implementation of regulation, period. Because you can frack with little water by recycling it. The problem is small gas companies and oil companies, they go, make a lot of money, 8 months later they leave actually the well, and actually not very well. And the wells are not tight, so the water comes up with all the chemicals into it. We can technically do it. it's all possible. So I'm not a friend of fracking and getting all the gas and so, but basically it's feasible. The governments are unwilling to regulate it and implement this regulation. And that's the issue in the fracking. It's not really a water issue. It's because of the lack of the willingness of the government, it becomes a water issue.
Thank you. Okay, that wasn't the final word. We won't have the final word here today either, I guess, but I'll leave you the final word of this panel. And I will start with David, because you've been last almost all day, so you'll go first now.
Well, I think it's appropriate to move my final comments because they are about public policy, and they are about the roles of the various institutions in this room at Stockholm Water Week and around the world. And we've really got to get our priorities straight, and we've got to understand that the purpose of our elected governments and the officials who work for the governments has got to become to serve the people and the planet, and we've got to get it straight.
Thank you. Tony.
Coming back to one of the main themes of the seminar, I guess, is pricing, and just want to reiterate a couple of points. I think we're all on a pricing journey. You know, even in the developing world, of course, the ability to pay is much lower, so it unavoidably has to be subsidised initially, as it was in Melbourne 150 years ago. It was subsidised by the rich. We've moved, as I said, to full user pays, and now we're on the next cycle of trying to include more and more externalities. So it's a continuum, and as long as you've got an eye on where you want to go, I think anywhere in that continuum is not a bad place to be, as long as you can see, you know, the final outcome you're aiming for.
Thank you. Anthony.
I think this debate has moved on a long way in the last 10 years. I had this discussion 10 years ago, it would have been fisticuffs or walkouts. I think the next step for us in the pricing and value discussion is how to go to the next step, how to get a lot smarter about our pricing, how to incorporate value into business calculations, into government public policy to make better decisions for sustainability.
Thank you. I was hoping you were going to say that we have moved a lot in the last 3 hours, but maybe that's hoping for too much. This again.
Yes, we have moved a bit in the last 3 hours.
Thank you.
We went out, got coffee, and came back. Well, here would be my final word. I mean, the first thing is that everybody does pay in some way or another. And unfortunately, in most of our countries, the poor pay the most. Those who have the access pay a very large part of their disposable income for water services compared to richer folk. Those who don't have the access pay with their time and opportunity costs because they can't have any other economic activity because they have to go and provide the water services for themselves. So getting the right pricing regime to match the value regime is the goal we should be vying for. But we have to do it in partnership, and we have to do it with a lot of smarts and a lot of innovation. And unfortunately, a lot of this discussion around pricing, it wasn't here today, but in most of the ones that we all get into, it's driven by a regulatory obsession with penalizing people. It's the wrong starting point. It's the wrong kind of partnership, and I think we have an ability to reverse that.
Thank you. Sasha.
The global change will actually increasingly demand an integrated, inclusive, fair and professional dealing with the water. In the past, we have not done an integrated approach, we have not been inclusively, we have not been fair, and we have not been professional enough. And only if we get that right, we actually will deal with the water in a way that it will sustain the human population over 2050.
Thank you. Igal.
All right, being the last one, I'll take the liberty to relate to actually the award, not so much about the issue we were dealing with now. Look, I think that the recognition that a company like Netafim has been awarded today is much beyond the fact that there is a ceremony and we get a prize, and this is something we appreciate very much. I think that recognition goes much beyond that. I have said numerous times today that one of the issues that actually strikes us and other people is the fact that being irrigation such a crucial issue dealing with water, it actually takes so little attention from the public and the policy setters. And I think that you should praise yourselves, particularly I'm talking about this institute and the committee that picked Netafim for putting that issue at the forefront of the agenda. And if there is a message that I am taking and I would leave with you, is that we need to talk more about irrigation, and obviously pricing and allocating water is not going to be resolved by being able to produce more water, but producing more water may be ultimately even more important than finding better ways to allocate and price water. That is really related to the subsistence of human beings. These human beings, the growing population, want to eat more and better. And nobody has the right to deny that from them. The problem is that we need more resources. We need more water, and again, we thank you for putting that at the top of the agenda this year. And we are very happy to be here, and we'll try to support the idea in general as much as we can.
Thank you very much. And thank you very much. I think this was a very interesting discussion. What I take with me is that it's still complicated, even more complicated, I guess, than we started, but I think I'm confused on a higher level, hopefully. And I also think another issue that is also important here, it also reinforces the message of this year's World Water Week, that we need to cooperate, not just between us water professionals, but we need, as Tony said, to get the agriculturalists together. We need to also work with the legislation people. We need to work with everybody to get these things right. It's not something that we will be able to solve in this room, nor the people watching us over the internet, but we really need to work together to solve these issues, and they are very, very important for the future. And if we do, we have a great future ahead of us. If we don't, we don't. Thank you very much for coming.